Hello, Eastview Scholars, and welcome to this edition of Sharp Shorts, where we are going to look at kind of the second tutorial we have, hitting a big picture. And this is our Rise of Life moment. We had a tutorial here where we kind of talked about the cycles and the nutrient cycles and how those and what role we play in how we can change our environment and our ecology if we throw those cycles off. This leans more towards those macromolecules we were looking at and does a quick examination of how could we have had life arise from abiotic sources. And just a big picture. It's something we will visit again and again as we try and keep the big picture going and look more at cells and organisms themselves, but this gives us a start off of our macromolecule knowledge to see how it's possible. Okay, quick question, which I'm sure you're already answering. None of these are alive, but this is the basis. We know our chnops and our water as a biological medium and stuff are the basis for living organisms, as well as, you know, carbon as the framework for all these macromolecules. Okay, now one thing we should do is define what it means to be alive. And there's many ways to say it. Here's a few some quick ways that I said. First of all, being made up of cells, whether single cellular is a prokaryote or multicellular is a eukaryote, and part of that is you need separation from the environment. You have to have basically an inside and outside, and you have to have a stable innards for all your processes to work your metabolism, etc. Certainly then it seems that you need to have a genetic code to help self-replicate, certainly grow and develop, and that doesn't mean getting taller and becoming an adult or anything necessarily. It means that you have to have cell growth and rejuvenation and stuff as well. Certainly multicellular organisms have a developmental phase also, as do prokaryotes. You must eat. You got to obtain and use that energy. You have to be able to respond to your environment and the things that are going on, which will then cause you to adapt over time. And certainly you must be able to reproduce viable offspring. So that's our basis of what we consider living organisms. Now, here's our early Earth. Scientific evidence showing that 4.5 billion years ago, and the Earth was formed. At that point, believed that there was little atmospheric oxygen, that there was high concentrations of hydrogen, maybe methane and ammonia. These two would be a key that separately, actually, two scientists, one Russian, one British, Haldane and Oparin, came up with theories that our early atmosphere was a reducing atmosphere, an electron-adding atmosphere, which would require a good amount of methane and ammonia to occur. And then with the energy provided by lightning and intensive UV radiation, you could then produce the macromolecules in that reducing environment from the protoplasmic soup, or whatever you wanted, the big chemical soup that you wanted to say. There has been some questions as to whether there was enough ammonia or methane around. Certainly there's belief that at least in the volcanic eruptions in those local little environments, things could have occurred. There's also evidence to suggest that maybe some of our life forms or abiotic development came from meteors as they were crashing into the Earth. Anyhow, one of the questions is, how might that have begun? And really, you kind of have these four, I guess you could call them steps, sequence of four main stages. First of all, you'd have to accumulate small organic molecules, abiotic synthesis. That goes into the possibility of having a reducing environment, and then the energy to join those in that reducing environment into polymers and make those macromolecules. Then you would need some sort of membrane-bound, say an early protocell, to incorporate this stuff and maintain an internal environment, and then of course some ability to self-replicate. And so the hypothesis is was it able to do that? And one of those theories is, can you test that theory? Can you come up with that hypothesis? Well, certainly Miller, under the guidance of Urey in 1953, wanted to look at those the theory independently proposed at the same by Haldane and Oparin, and you can basically see the apparatus where he tried to simulate what they believed would be the conditions of early Earth with the appropriate amount of gases, everything else, and give it some energy and see if you could make some macromolecules. And as you can see, he did. There were very successful in making some small macromolecules and amino acids and other organic compounds from this recipe. Okay. Amino acids and other organic compounds found in living organisms today were produced. So does that prove it? Well, the experiment has been redone in a number of different ways. It's also been re-examined, some of the initial stuff, and found that there was actually more organic compounds than they knew of. But it has been redone, and under different conditions, some believing that it was a more neutral atmosphere without the reducing agents of ammonia and methane and stuff like that. But the one thing that can be done is, or the one thing that has been seen in every attempt at redoing the Miller-Urey experiments, is that there have been biological molecules and organic compounds formed in stuff that they're doing. And now certainly they're doing studies in deep sea vents and submerged volcanoes to see if you can see some of the similar stuff, and we will have more readings on this in class. Okay. Other option, as we said, could meteors and stuff have been, and many meteors have been found or have hit the Earth, and they can rule out contamination, and they have been found to contain some of those organic molecules that would provide the basis for living organisms. Okay. So where are we at? Well, it appears, thanks to Miller and Urey, that we have at least simulated the possibility of making organic molecules from accumulations of small stuff. With the discovery of ribozymes, it appears that we have found an origin of heredity, and it also appears, as we'll have in a reading, that scientists have been able to simulate again protocells. Okay. So here I was talking about this. We have ribozymes, and it appears that ribozymes RNA is not just able to copy DNA, but is also has a self-replicating and enzymes to form short RNA and use it as a template and copy itself. That getting incorporated into a small protocell could give the basis for self-replication for the earliest self-replicating protocells in organisms. Okay. So 1980s discovered RNA can function as a catalyst, and we will do this reading. Scientists create first cell controlled by a synthetic genome, and then that they were able to kind of essentially simulate that self-heredity. Okay. Protocells, aggregation of abiotically produced molecules into droplets called protocells, have a chemical characteristic, abiotically reproduced from aggregates of precursors to those macromolecules. The internal and the external environments are separated, as should be for living things. Not quite capable of precise reproduction, but they do exhibit metabolism and excitability, which leads to its ability to respond to stimuli. So if you look at the four main points of that hypothesis, it appears that there is basis in growing evidence that that is one possible way to take abiotic stuff, or one possible theory as to how life evolved on Earth. And so looking at this in more of a picture moment here, so say you have these oxygen producing little protocells around, which we have seen as evidence in stromatolites and layers of prokaryotes and single celled organisms dating back about 3.5 billion years ago. Okay. All right. And say that they start utilizing the oxygen and kicking more oxygen out into the atmosphere and creating creating actions that would build more oxygen in the atmosphere, as evidenced by, here we go, right here in Minnesota, little formation of rust with oxygen, iron, and water vapor. We can see those banded formations. Okay. Then it seems possible with that evidence that as they are laying around and you have a very low oxygen atmosphere, that as you have those protocells and as they start to photosynthesize and produce oxygen and do those compounds, that at some point you could have a big oxygen revolution. Okay. And there's more to talk about this when we talk about the early cells and mitochondria and chloroplasts and the development of photosynthetic organisms. But the start here is just to say it's a possibility as we see the rise of oxygen-using organisms and evidence from archaeological records and geological records. Anyhow, that's our quick look at Rise of Life, Scholar on Eastview.